Shavua Tov, and good morning, and welcome to our Parsha class, the Parsha of Balak. We found on page 1014, 1015 in the Good Chumash. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya b'dvarei. Parsha of Balak, fascinating Parsha. A Parsha that's filled with blessings. But interestingly, the source of these blessings, the person who has blessed us with these blessings, was not Moses, not Aaron, was not any of the great Jewish leaders. It was a non-Jewish prophet. And not only was it a non-Jewish prophet, but it was a Jew-hating prophet. Right? The prophet of named Bilam, who was hired by Balak. Balak, who was the king of Moab. And as we mentioned last week, and to mention in last week's parsha, that we're standing now at the end of the 40 years of the wandering in the desert. Last week was the transitional parsha where we switched from the first 2 years to the last year of their 40-year wandering. Like we mentioned, the middle 38 years we know nothing about, other than the few places that they traveled. We don't have any incidents, any God speaking to Moses. In fact, it says that God did not speak to Moses for all these years. And the Jewish people were in the desert for 38 years, eating the manna, studying Torah, whatever they were doing for 38 years. Serving God through the tabernacle, through the Mishkan. And then we start talking about what happened at the end. We have Miriam dies, last week's parsha. Aaron, a few months later in the summer, dies as well. And then we have the Jewish people who are trying to get into the land of Israel, starting from the southern tip, trying to go through Edom, who are descendants of Esav, and they did not allow them through. And God directed Moshe not to fight them. And so they circle around them. Again, I always reference this map, the Good Chumash on page 118, kind of get a clearer picture where we're at. So you have Edom, and then they circle around Edom, and they have the great nations of Ammon and Moab, with the kings of Sichon and Og, who are basically supposed to be a buffer for the Canaanites, who kind of were paying Sichon and Og to be that buffer and to be that protection from the Jewish people, but they were able to wage war against them, and they conquered many territories, many cities and territories. And now the Jewish people are where it says the plains of Moab, in this valley right near the Jordan River. And they're kind of getting ready to enter into the land of Israel, crossing the Jordan River. And we have the king of Moab, Balak, who is very nervous now. What's going to be? We see that we can't fight them. There are gods on their side. They are waging wars on Balak and others, and they're being successful. So what do we do? So he decides to take a different tactic, try a different route. And this is the more spiritual route. He says, let's see if we can hire someone like Bilam, who was a non-Jewish prophet, who will curse the Jewish people and bring this like negative energy on them. And that perhaps will allow us to protect ourselves, to fend off the Jewish nation. And this is this week's Parsha. The Parsha named Balak, which is basically the story of Balak hiring to curse the Jewish people. And what happens? Initially, God tells him not to go, and then God tells him you could go, but the words that I put in your mouth, those are the words that you should utter. Those are the words that you should say. And it turns out that instead of cursing them, each time he opened his mouth, what happened? Blessings, beautiful, rich blessings come forth. Some of the most beautiful blessings that we have today. In fact, in our prayer book, in our daily prayers, we actually we quote some of the blessings of this Parsha of Bilam. Matovo ohalecha Yaakov. We begin our morning blessing prayers. How goodly are your tents, Yaakov, Mishnesecha Yisrael, the dwelling place of Israel. That's a verse that we say every morning. It's from a blessing of Bilam. And there are many other famous verses that are thanks to Bilam. There are some blessings and telling of the future or time of Mashiach will come, also from this week's parsha. And it's a great study because sometimes the blessings are a little hard to understand, a little poetic the way they're said, and many commentators explain what they mean. But it's a very uplifting. It's an uplifting parsha because instead of hearing curses and plaints, here we have some beautiful blessings. There's an interesting note before we get into a few of the verses, is that when I read this parsha, what the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that this is perhaps one of the few times in the Torah where there was a major incident that occurred to the Jewish people, unbeknownst to them. In other words, the Jewish people knew nothing about this whole story. This whole dialogue, this whole incident was happening behind their backs. The Jewish people were in the plains of Moab. They didn't know what's going on behind closed doors. They didn't know that Balak is plotting to curse them. He sent messengers to Bilam, and Bilam comes. And where does he go to curse them? He's standing on the top of the mountains, the surrounding mountains, far away from them. He sees them from the distance, and he's opening his mouth to curse them, and he ends up blessing them. But the Jewish people knew nothing about it. They didn't know about the curses, and they didn't know about this blessing, right? That how they were saved from these curses. And how do they know about it? They read it in the Torah. They say, "Oh, really? This is what happened. We never knew." And I always think about that because in our lives, it's so applicable as well, right? Things go well for ourselves sometimes, or always, and sometimes we don't even realize that. Wait, there's someone looking out for us. Whether it is a physical someone, whether it is parents, siblings, a friend of ours, a coworker of ours, a community member who behind our backs, right, put in a good word for us, or arrange something for us, and we didn't even know about it. Just something that comes to mind. I was speaking to one of the Chabad rabbis here in town, and this was after Katrina. He was involved with one of these big name national philanthropists who is able to give quite a bit of tzedakah every year, and he would give nicely to many Chabad institutions who needed funds. And he had a friend who was on campus building up a Chabad on campus and needed funds for a building and trying to secure a building and build a building, or to buy a building, to renovate a building, and he needed some significant funds. And he didn't have locally anyone really to ask. And so this other Chabad rabbi from the town, from here in New Orleans, was speaking to one of we call him an international philanthropist in New York who has given him funds here in New Orleans. And as he's talking, he says, my friend in this other city really could use some help. Whatever. He just kind of dropped that line, and that was it. Later, a few years later, he hears from his friend that this person actually gave him a nice amount of money, and he told him, by the way, your friend in New Orleans put in a good word for you. Mm-hmm. In other words, he happened to say that. If he did not say that, look, a guy came and he gave me all the funds I needed. It's great, but what's happening behind your back, right? are your friends helping you? Is obviously your parents, what are they doing behind your back to make sure that everything goes smoothly, that you get into your school, that you get your job, that you have food, whatever you need, right? It's like unbeknownst to you. The Jewish people, they're sitting in the plains of Moab. Okay, everything sounds right. We're about to go into Israel. Everything sounds right. But do you even know about the threats that are happening behind your back, and Hashem is protecting you every moment? This is like something that you have to really think about every day. When you say Modeh ani lefanecha, give thanks to God. Show the gratitude. Not only for the gratitude that you know about. That this happened, that didn't happen. I was saved here, I was saved there. Of course, every time there's something, a serious incident happening, you have to stop and say thank you. I was almost hit by a car. Thank you. Or I was hit by a car and I survived. Thank you. Right. This business deal went through. Wow. Thank you. But then the regular things that just, life is occurring and moving on, and it seems to be just normal. This is unnatural. Wait, it's not natural. There's someone pulling strings behind the scenes. And you have to say thank you. So that's just something that comes to mind overall on this parsha. When this whole incident, the whole parsha happened behind the scenes, unbeknownst to the Jewish people, and there's a beautiful curse that was saved from stopped from happening, and the beautiful blessings. Obviously, a blessing, especially a blessing that was repeated here in the Torah, carries weight, has meaning, and definitely has an influence and positive impact on the Jewish people. But I want to read a few verses over here, which I think are very apropos for this time. This is the first time that Bilam opens his mouth and tries to curse the Jewish people. We'll start from verse 5. We'll be on page 1023, chapter 23, verse 5. Vayasem Hashem davar b'fi Bilam. God then placed words in the mouth of Bilam. Vayomer shuv el Balak, and he said, "Return to Balak and say the following." This is exactly what you should say. Vayashav elav. So Bilam returns to Balak. V'hine nitzav aleilase. Balak was standing next to the burnt offering. Hu v'chol sarim mayab. He was there with all the ministers, the dignitaries of Moab were all there. And Bilam returns. And what does Bilam say? He opens his mouth and he says exactly the words that God placed in his mouth. And Bilam opens his mouth. He begins his parable and he says, Min Aram Yancheni Balak ben Moav Meharere Kedem. From Aram, Balak has brought me. Meharere Kedem. The king of Moab has brought me from the east mountains. L'cha oroli Yaakov. That Balak told me, come, curse Jacob, right? Yaakov. And come bring anger against Yisrael, right? You notice over here right away the two names of Yaakov, right? Yaakov had the name Yaakov, and then later he had an additional name Yisrael. So he mentions both of them, Yaakov and Yisrael. That Balak calls me, and he says, let's curse these Jewish people, and we're going to curse them, Yaakov and Yisrael, whichever name works. We'll try both in case maybe we'll say Yaakov and really they're called Yisrael, or Yisrael really they're Yaakov. We're going to try both of these names. Ma ekoiv loy kaboy kel. But how can I condemn one whom God has not condemned? Uma ezoim loy zoam Hashem. And how can I bring anger if God has not been angered? Verse 9. Ki meroish surim enu. I see them from the head of the rocks. Umigvaois ashurenu. I look at them from the hills. And it means literally he was standing on the hill above and looking at them, looking down at the Jewish people. But he's also kind of hinting to the fact That I don't just see the Jewish people as a nation, as who they are here and now, but I see them from the hills. I see their source. I see where they come from. Right? I'm looking up high. I see the forefathers, the foremothers. I see Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I see Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. I see the origin of the Jewish people. I say, how could I curse them? They're blessed, right? How many times do people tell you, I know your parents, I know your grandparents. Oh, what's those wonderful people? The strength that they have, that they are the children of our forefathers and foremothers. That's what I see. How can I curse them? Here he says something very interesting. Hen levadod yishkoin. This is a nation that badod yishkoin. We're gonna maybe analyze this word a little bit. I see here in the translation, it goes with one of the translation. It says it will dwell alone. This nation dwells alone. What does that mean? We'll get to that in a moment. Uvagoyim lo yizchashav, and will not be reckoned with the other nations. Mimona afar Yaakov, who has counted the infants of Yaakov, umispar esroiva Yisrael, or the number of the divisions of Israel. Tamois nafshi, mois yisharim, may my soul die the death of the upright. Yosihi acharisi kamayu, and let my end be like this. That was the words that Bilam just said in front of Balak and all the ministers of Moab. And you can imagine Balak's reaction to that. Vayomer Balak and Bilam. So Balak tells Bilam, Me asisali, what have you done to me? I have taken you to curse my enemies. And you have just blessed them. Beautiful blessing. What's going on over here? Bilam, you're not following the instructions we gave you. Vayan vayoymar. And Bilam answers and he says, Haloi eis asher yosim Hashem befi, oisoi eshmer ledak. I already told you, it's the words that God will place into my mouth. These words I have to guard and follow. And this is what I have to speak. And this kind of repeats itself numerous times, the rest of the Parsha, where they try to go to this angle, that angle, let's stand on this mountain, stand on that mountain. And every time Bilam opens his mouth, beautiful blessings come forth, and Balak gets really angered. Why is this happening? Well, let's go back just to kind of focus on this one verse that we mentioned. Hen levadad yishkot, that this nation stands alone, dwells alone. Uvagoyim lo yizchashav, will not be reckoned with the nations. What does this mean? I mean, it's a blessing, obviously, right? Bill telling us a blessing. What is this blessing? That the nation will dwell alone. So we're the chosen people, and therefore, what does dwell alone mean? Stand alone? It means chosen by God. I guess we're different than everyone else. Okay. We're held accountable. We have the responsibility. So, good points. You look at the commentators, you find two explanations that I want to focus on. We have Rashi, and we have Nachmanides. We'll start with Rashi. Rashi says something interesting. And I don't know if Rashi is translated here. Let me see. No. So Rashi says as follows. Rashi says, Lo yihiyu nasin kala im sh'ar ha'umas. We stand alone and we are not reckoned like the other nations. He says, look, there is this miracle that happens to the Jewish people. Already then, Bilam already said this, or foretold this. In antiquity, there were many nations. At this time, you have 7 nations living in Canaan, right? Canaanites, Hittites, all these nations. And there were many more nations. We know there are 70 nations of the world. And as the Jewish people went, you know, through the times in Israel, there was the Persians, there were the Romans, there were the Greeks, and these were all powerful, powerful nations, empires. Many of them ruled, you know, vast amounts of territory, you know. And then the Jewish people. What do we rule? What do we own? We were wandering the desert for 40 years. We were homeless for 40 years. And then we had a nation. And then we had a land. We had a land of Israel. We didn't hold on to it for very long because after a few hundred years, or close to 800 years or so, we were banned. We were exiled from Israel. And again, we were homeless. Babylon, wherever we were. And then 70 years later, we returned to Israel. Small percentage of the Jewish people returned to Israel. And we kind of take hold of Israel, even though we are kind of under the jurisdiction of the Persians or the Romans. We don't really have our own sovereignty, you know. And again, we're banned from Israel, or you know, the temples were destroyed, and many Jews are dispersed throughout the diaspora, throughout the Middle East, throughout Europe, and we're homeless, right? But at the same time, when the other nations were strong, they had their land, they had their territories. And Bilam predicts something. Bilam says, "Hein levadad yishkai." They will be different. The Jewish people will not be reckoned like the rest of the nations. In which way? Rashi says, all other nations come and go. Here today, gone tomorrow. The Jewish people. There's this miracle of the Jewish people that they are an eternal nation. Somehow, they've been surviving all this time. And there's no real answer to the question, how is this possible? It's the one nation that has been hated, you know, from the start. They've been persecuted. And there have been many, many attempts to eliminate the Jewish. And it's not like the Jewish people had strong armies and a lot going for them. And time and again, the Jewish people somehow are still here. No, students of history could predict this and say, "Listen, I've seen this. I've seen this before, right? I've seen other nations, and it makes sense that in 3,000 years we'll still be around, with all that we have endured." I mean, there were other nations who had something similar happen to them, where there was persecution, and guess what? It worked. Unfortunately, there are many, beautiful tribes and nations that were around. They're not here today because, either because of the haters and the enemies, or because of assimilation, and just kind of over time they kind of died out, and that's it. It's not here anymore. I was a number of years ago. I did actually a bris for a Jewish family who married into this tribe, this American Indian tribe here in Louisiana, and they were saying how this tribe is dying out because there's people are assimilating, people are marrying out of the tribe, and slowly, after giving another generation, 2 or 3, we're not going to have anyone left. It's a real concern, and it's a concern that happens and it actually happens, right? There are many people who are not here anymore because they've assimilated. But the Jewish people, we're still here. We're still here, stronger than ever. And this is what Bilam is saying. We're not just another nation. God doesn't treat us like another. There are 70 nations. The Jewish people are the 71st. Okay, no, it's different, and it's miraculous. Absolutely, I don't see how there's a natural and an answer in nature to say it just makes sense. It just makes sense. Everything came together. It's the hand of Hashem. It's a miraculous thing. It's a miraculous phenomenon that we're still here. And Bilam predicted it. Bilam, from all people, said this will happen. Then already, at the start of the Jewish people, when they're in the desert, homeless, wandering for 40 years, what does Bilam say? I see this nation. They have a long journey ahead of them. They're going to be fighting the Canaanites. They're going to be fighting the Assyrian Greeks. They're going to be fighting the Persians. They're going to be fighting the Romans. And they will lose battles. I mean, I'm paraphrasing what Bilam is saying. They will lose battles. And they will sin. And they'll be punished. And many Jewish people will die. And there will be assimilation. But ultimately, it's going to be a nation. They're going to be the nation standing. And however many years, and everyone else will be extinct, as it is today, right? There's no Roman Empire as there was, and there's no Greek Empire, and right? That's what Rashi says. Rashi says. Now, what exactly is the secret to the Jewish survival? Yes, it's a miracle from Hashem. But we have to be careful not to just rely on the Hashem's miracle, because, like we said, not everyone is part of this miracle, right? We want to make sure that we're part of the miracle, right? So we have to kind of do something to be part of this miracle of survival. So what do we have to do? What is the secret, the key ingredient to Jewish survival? So we are
selfless devotion to God.
Okay. Sorry, Dina?
Selfless devotion to God, Rashi says.
Selfless devotion to God. So we had over here a number of years ago, lots of you here, Dan, were you here? On Shavuos. Shavuos night, we do like an all-nighter. So one of the topics we did, it must have been maybe 5, 6 years ago, was the key or the secret to Jewish survival. We had like 7 different it was like a debate. What is the mitzvah or the secret to Jewish survival? Whether it is like keeping Shabbos, it's prayer, faith in God, having children, land of Israel, whatever we had. It was like a bunch of different things, and like each person came up and made an argument. Like this is the secret. Now, if we all kept Shabbat, if we all prayed every day, if we all did a mitzvah, if we all had children, if we all, believe whatever it was, this is the secret to Jewish survival. The truth is, obviously, all the above, right? It's Jewish life and Jewish belief, and everything together is a secret. But each one plays a very important role in that. There's something unique about each one of these things. Right? For example, Shabbat, right? There's something unique about Shabbat that you could say does contribute to Jewish survival. The fact that every Shabbat we take time off. It's time to think about who we are, our connection with God. It's time to come to synagogue and to connect with Hashem. It also helps building family time together, sitting around the Shabbat table, or to build community, family also, right? Together, sitting together. And so there's a lot about Shabbat that you could say, wow, people who keep Shabbat, they have a future in Judaism. Okay. So having children, of course, is Jewish survival, and important to have large families. That's an obvious one. Jewish education, right? Of course, Jewish education is key to Jewish survival, because if you don't educate your children to be Jewish, or what it means to be Jewish, what are the chances that your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren will still be Jewish, right? I always say, growing up in Toronto, there's these old shuls that downtown Toronto, in old neighborhoods. One of them was called Anshe Lubavitch. Right? You hear the word Anshe Lubavitch, that actually means the people. The people of Lubavitch. Lubavitch was a town in Russia where the Chabad movement started, Lubavitch. And you would think, wow, must be a big Chabad synagogue in Toronto. It was established in like the in the late 1800s, I believe. Yeah. And basically closed down already. What happened? So my father told me that what he heard was that these Hasidim, the Chabad Hasidim, moved to Canada, moved to Toronto, and they established this shul, Anshe Lavav, which is a thriving shul. All these, Russian Chassidim, and you're coming with all the Russian, your old Europe, old school type of Judaism. But one thing that they didn't do is they didn't build schools for their kids. So they didn't have a structured Jewish education for their children. So maybe one generation, two generations, three generations, before you turn around, if you don't educate your children what it means to be Jewish, then it doesn't survive, right? So obviously a very important key ingredient in Jewish survival is Jewish education, obviously trusting Hashem. I mean, the list goes on.
In all of them, there's always somebody who says it's pointless fighting and we should save everybody that we can. And they just go into hiding and saving people. I mean, every single, from even Egyptian Hanukkah and the dreidel, practice in the dreidel to learn to teach in hiding,
Yeah. Obviously, maybe more what Lou was saying, the general Jewish morals and values. Yeah. The value of life, etc. Yeah. So all these things play an important role in the key to Jewish survival. And together with that, like I said, it's still miraculous. So together with that, the value of life, exactly. Yeah. But here I want to introduce what Nachmanides says. Because you can take all the above and kind of read it into the words of Nachmanides. So Nachmanides, another commentary on the Chumash, we mentioned him often, Moshe ben Nachman, who lived a little bit after Rashi, which we just previously mentioned, and he says, I don't have it in front of me right now, but to paraphrase what he says he takes a little more literal. Because when Rashi says they will dwell alone, meaning alone that they're going to be different, right? We're different in the fact that we will survive, unlike everyone else. But Nachmanides says, Badad alone means literally, we're going to be different. We're just going to be different. There'll be many people who will hate us, who won't see that we're just like everyone else. We're going to be different. And the obvious question that may come to mind is, well, why is this a blessing? Who wants that? I mean, that's the fact of life. Okay, but blessing, right? These are blessings, not curses. The blessing that Bilam gives us is that we will stand alone. And not to say that we love it and it's like, wow, we're so excited about it. But what is the blessing here? Perhaps Nachmanides is telling us, what is the key to Jewish survival? What is this secret? The fact that we are alone. In other words, we have to have this pride to know who we are and ultimately stand alone, not in the fact that we can't engage with others and we can't live normal lives and be involved in the workforce and be involved in politics and be involved in all of a society's life. But we also have to know internally, we have to realize that no, I'm Levada Yishkan. There's something a little different. And we have our own morals, our own values, our own way of life, our own perspectives. And sometimes there's certain things that we cannot partake in. We cannot be involved in because it goes against who we are. We have to have that Jewish pride. We know who we are. We're not embarrassed. And this, perhaps, Nachmanides is telling us, is truly what the secret of Jewish survival is. How do we survive? Because we always knew that we are a little different. In the 1970s, I think it goes back to, and I might be wrong with the years, but maybe in the 80s, I think it goes back to the 70s. There was a man, Rabbi, actually from Philadelphia, Rabbi Abraham Shem Tov. He's still alive today. May live and be well. He's up there in age, still active. And he was a Chabad emissary to Philadelphia. And together, by extension of Philadelphia, he was also like a Chabad emissary to Washington, D.C. Today, his son, Levi Shem Tov, really runs the Washington, D.C. office of Chabad. He's more in Philadelphia. But they do a lot of programs with politicians, White House, Congress, in D.C. And one of the big things that they started is, the Rebbe would always encourage on Hanukkah to have public menorah lightings, right? Public Hanukkah celebrations, which is something that a lot of other Jewish leaders, are a little nervous about. What is this? Let's keep it private. Why we have to kind of? The Rebbe said, no, we need this. We need that Jewish identity here in America. We have to be proud of our religion, and we could showcase our menorah. What's a big deal, right? So he came up with this idea. Let's have a menorah lighting on the White House lawn, which till today it's done now on national TV. It's a big fanfare, but at the time it was novel. It was a new idea, and he went through all the permissions he had to get. It was a big ordeal. He was able to put up a menorah at the White House lawn. Initially, it was like a small menorah, like maybe 3-4 feet, and then he was able to put up this big menorah. And he even got, I believe it was Jimmy Carter at the time. What years were Jimmy Carter? No? Sorry, it's before my time.
He was before Reagan, right?
Right. No. Okay, as we're looking this up, fact checkers. So I believe he was the one who was president at the time. And 77 to 81. Okay, so in those years. And it was, I think, the first night, second night of Hanukkah, and they get on this lift to go up to this big menorah. And what's the plan? How many candles do you light? Let's say it was the first night. How many candles do you light in the first night? You're lighting 2, the middle and one, right? One candle for the first night. And so the lighting that, I think the first or second night, the lighting that, that amount of candles. It's Rabbi Shem Tov and Carter, I believe it was Carter, whoever was the president at the time, I believe it was Carter, together. And Carter says, Rabbi, why don't we light all of the candles? That'd be so much nicer. Prior to why don't we light all the candles? Now, what would you do at that moment? You're standing with the president of the United States. You're on national. I don't know. I think it was televised live, but perhaps it wasn't. But let's say it was televised live, and it's the first night of Hanukkah or the second night of Hanukkah, and the president says, "Rabbi, let's light all the candles." What do you do?
But wasn't that a tradition?
Okay. See, it's good to give you some preparation boots, right? In case you're in that position. So Rabbi Shem Tov was caught off guard and didn't know what to do. So at the moment he said, "Okay, let's do it." Like that's what he did. So they lit all the candles. So Rabbi Shem Tov, I think he realized that maybe he made a mistake, but whatever. So after the event, he was in New York and he went to visit the Rebbe and he was giving him a report. It was a major event. First time the president was lighting a menorah. I mean, it was like amazing, event. So the Rebbe, hearing about the event, and he came to this part where he said that basically the president asked him to light the entire menorah. So the Rebbe says something to the, he says, Rabbi Shem Tov, I expected more of you. Where is the Gaon Yaakov? Where was like that Jewish pride at that moment? And you can tell the president humbly, respectfully tell them, tonight's the first night, you light only one candle.
Yeah.
In other words, just because someone of power, of influence, has one way of doing things, it doesn't mean we have to follow.
Right.
We have to say, you know what? We're Jewish. I have my way of doing things. And my way is not better or different, it's just our way. This is how we do it. And we have to be proud of it. We have to stand up for ourselves. Sometimes it means we're a little different. That's what Nachmanides says. But perhaps this feeling within us, and this way of life, is what really allows us to survive all this time. Right? assimilation. Sometimes we feel, and this is like Jews when Jews came to America, throughout, America's history, they came from overseas. They came from Europe. They came from the shtetl, where everything was Jewish, and that was Jewish life. And there was a lot of persecution, and there was a lot of differences. They weren't able, especially in Eastern Europe, kind of assimilate to be part of the society. When they came to America, it's the free land, and everyone's accepted. But don't be Jewish here. Judaism is for it's an old school thing, right? Here, if you want to, at home, when no one's looking, you can maybe be a little Jewish, but out of the open, you got to be like everyone else, right? Live life. People who wanted to keep Shabbat out the window. It was impossible to keep Shabbat. You couldn't hold a job if you wanted to keep Shabbat. If someone wanted to have a beer, if someone wanted wear yarmulke, if someone wanted to be openly Jewish, it was unacceptable. And unfortunately, right? People change their names, right? Yeah. Karnowski to Karna, right? All the skis and all the steens and all of this, right? It went out the window, right? Even my father-in-law, Rabbi Nemes, right? Nemes, the original name, you know what Nemes' name was?
No.
Nemeshansky. He's a Nemeshansky. And Nemes, who's Nemeshansky, right? Right. Right. But the point wasn't just about changing your name, but it was about your identity. People felt like, hey, right. So the problem was that many people did not have that strength within them to say, you know what, perhaps I could change my name, or I need to get a job, but I still know who I am. And to have that, the Oin Yaakov, the Jewish pride, and to pass it on to the next generation, the generation after that. And slowly, what happened was, unfortunately, how many times you ask people, oh, my great grandparents were Jewish, but like I'm nothing, I know nothing of it. And that's that. So the key, like I said, to be part of this miracle, we have to have that levot, something we realize we are a little different. So this is like the two explanations. The Rashi and the Chmanides are giving us like this almost like this dichotomy within Jewish survival. On the one hand, we have this miracle of survival. On the other hand, we've always been persecuted. But perhaps one answers the other. Why have we, how does this miracle come about? Because we always feel a little different. Yes, there's always a little hate and all that, but ultimately we realize that we have so much to contribute to society, and in a way which is totally unbalanced to, not in ratio to what the numbers of the Jewish people are, right? What percentage are we of humanity? No, what's the percentage of Jewish people, right? 0.5%, 1/4%. What is it, right?
Right.
What are the percent of Jewish people who receive Nobel Prizes, for example?
Right.
I think it's 30%, right? With the percentage of the success in life, right? We're not here. Point is, thank God, Jewish people were able to contribute so much to society in all areas of society, way above their percentage, the ratio of Jewish people. But at the same time, we don't always receive that back, right? That based on the contribution that we give to society, we don't receive that love back from society. But you know what? Sometimes that's a blessing, because that, in a way, is a key, is a secret to our survival. We have to know that. We have to know that. We have to know that as an individual, as a leader of our family, and as I would say in Israel as well. Israel has the same issue with their neighbors and how to deal with their neighbors. On the one hand, you want to have peace with your neighbor. You want to have peace with Egypt. You want to have peace with Lebanon. You want to have peace with Syria. You want to have peace with Jordan, right? Because you're living side by side as nations, as countries. You want to have peace, or who wants war? But where does the peace come from? Who ultimately is protecting the Jewish people? Of course, we know it's God. And therefore, when we do negotiate for peace, and we obviously should, we have to keep that in mind, that our peace does not come from America, other big countries. Yes, we all need them. We have to play the game. We have to do it right. That's called politics. But we have to realize that ultimately who is keeping us alive. And therefore, certain decisions that we made a little differently, knowing that when it comes from a place of strength. So there's an interesting dialogue, interesting conversation that the Rebbe had with Rabin, who, Jewish history, Rabin obviously a very important figure. We've been to Rabin's the museum that they made on his life. Fascinating. So he was throughout Israeli history in different positions, and he was also a general fighting wars. The 6 Day War he was very involved in. And he had this conversation with the Rebbe once about this exact verse. Rabin. What does it mean? Hein am levadad yishko. And Rabin told the Rebbe that he sees this as a curse, not a blessing. He sees this as a terrible thing, that the Jewish people should stand alone. Who wants to stand alone? We need to have peace with our nations, and we need to have America on our side. We need to have Europe on our side. We can't stand alone. And the Rebbe told him that they're making a big mistake. We don't want to stand alone in the fact that we don't want to have supporters and allies. Of course we do. But we have to realize that ultimately we are in an independent nation, not, God forbid, independent God, but independent from other nations. Our survival, our existence is not dependent on other nations. It's us and God. Levadad means alone, it's us and God. And we got to do our part to make sure that our other nations also support us for their interests. Ultimately, let's not fool ourselves. It's all personal interest. No nation does things altruistically. That's not what countries do. Countries don't do things altruistically. Countries are always looking out for themselves, and for their best interest, it's good for them to help other nations sometimes. And that's what happens. So ultimately, Israel has to know that we have God on our side. This is our existence. This is our being. This is our independence. And we need to do our part to make sure that other countries will also support us. So but it's a blessing. The Rebbe told him in a private audience. It's a blessing. This verse is a blessing for the Jewish nation. And this has to kind of be what drives us when we do go into negotiations and peace treaties and all that. Unfortunately, Rabin did not heed the Rebbe's words. And later in 96, it was, not 96, he died before then, but when he was signing the Oslo Accords, and he made this speech. In his speech, he quoted this verse. And he said that now we're no longer a Am Levadad Yishko. He says now we're no longer a nation that stands alone. Meaning he still understood this verse as a negative. And he says, now that we have this peace treaty, now we're not standing alone anymore. Now we have all our nations, all the other countries on our side. And I think it was a big mistake. The mistake was in perspective. The mistake was, yes, we do need support from other countries, but don't say that this is what we're looking for, not to be alone. No, it's okay to be alone. It's okay to be alone with God and have the nations support us. Understand that we have our independence because God is on our side. So that's good for Israel to know that when they have to do their job, but it's also good for us when we have to do our job with the wars that we have to fight, our eternal wars and the wars of assimilation, and with all that's going on around us, to know that yes, we have to do whatever we have to do to be part of society, but at the same time, we have to have the backbone. We have to have the independence, knowing that ultimately we're Jewish, and we have that connection with God. That was really what keeps us going. So that is my little vart for this week's Parsha. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dina, Lynn, and Susan, Diane, Lewis, and Lance, and all the millions of people who are watching us on Facebook. Take care.